So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this session today, and thanks to Tracy for organizing this and inviting me to spend some time with you talking about my experience in graduate school at UTSA and how that experience has fit into my life and career journey, and I hope to be able to provide some reflections on what I think I've learned from this process of transition, having finished my PhD at UTSA just last year, and now working in a museum context. So I first just wanted to start by giving you a very brief sense for who I am and where I come from and how I got to this place in my life now. So I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia, and I grew up in a context that, and these might seem like sort of extraneous details, but they're important, I think, for understanding who I am in my journey. So I grew up in a home with a relatively progressive religious background that was also pretty deeply connected to the outdoors and valuing being out in nature and appreciating it. I took lots of trips as a child with my family, camping, and spent a lot of time outdoors. And I attribute a lot of my interest in environmental issues today to those early experiences. And also, from a relatively early age, started learning new languages, and I've always been very curious about other cultures. I went to a Spanish immersion in high school, and so I started learning Spanish quite young, and that has just sort of gradually blossomed into what I'm doing today. So just that is a little bit of a foundation for my early years. And then I went to I did my undergraduate studies at Elon University in North Carolina. It's a relatively small liberal arts college, and I studied international studies and Spanish. And this international studies focus that I started out with was really the beginning of what's become a lifelong commitment to interdisciplinarity and trying to understand multiple angles on a particular human challenge or issue. And I also was fortunate enough during my undergraduate times to start actually traveling abroad and using my Spanish, but also getting some direct experience learning about local communities and actually getting to know different cultures in Latin America. Particularly, I started out in Mexico and then in Dominican Republic, and then ultimately somehow found my way to Ecuador, which is where I have worked for the majority of my time so far. I began just studying. I studied abroad in Quito for a semester, and then I had a small grant to do an undergraduate project there, and that's kind of where I would say everything started. And so as I get into the Ecuador material now, I do want to share some images with you. So hopefully this will work.
I can see it.
Can everyone see this? Yes?
Yes.
So for anyone that's not familiar with the geography of South America, Ecuador is in the northwest part of South America. And I lived in Quito, in the capital city, which you can see there, as well as in the Amazon region, which you can see on this artistic map that I love to the right, the big green expanse. And I started out there, as I mentioned, doing undergraduate research, and I was interested in indigenous social movements and how they were connected to local projects for cultural revitalization and alternative livelihoods. And with this initial seed of an idea and an early project was how I eventually got connected to my advisor at UTSA, because my advisor, as some people I see that Sadie is on this call, knows quite well. He works also in Ecuador with the Cofan people in the northern part of Amazonian Ecuador. And I was really drawn to the program at UTSA, both because of this environmental focus of the anthropology program at UTSA, but also because I appreciated the combination of theoretical rigor and methodological rigor with strong political commitments and a commitment to understanding and supporting local people's efforts and grassroots organizing, development of community enterprise, all of these sorts of efforts. So that's largely how I ended up at UTSA. And I started my time in graduate school in 2012, in the fall of 2012. So a little while ago. And while I was at UTSA, I took a combination of anthropology courses, but I also, and I think this is important, I tried to explore some sort of adjacent interests. So I took some courses in the nonprofit management certificate program. I didn't actually finish the program, but some of those courses were very useful for where I am today. And then obviously as a PhD student, the bulk of my work in graduate school was focused on my research. And so this was the area where I worked. I worked in an indigenous territory called the Pueblo Quichua de Rucuyacta, which is a territory of indigenous Amazonian Quichua people, is the name of the nation, also locally known as the Napo Runa. And I lived in the headquarters of this territory called Rucuyacta, which is the community that you see on the bottom left of this aerial image. And I also worked in another community called Tambayacu, which is within that same territory, but a little bit further away from the main urban centers. And the thrust of my research was focused on trying to understand how indigenous Amazonian people relate to the market and to global capitalism, and how they strategically integrate market activities into their broader political projects in pursuit of their notion of well-being. And so in particular, I looked at this industry that was emerging while I was in graduate school. It started around 2009, around this plant called Wayusa, which is a holly leaf that was becoming a popular tea product at the time, and has since become a popular ingredient in energy drinks and bottled teas. And so I was trying to understand the processes of cultural translation that were occurring in this industry, as well as how growing the leaves and selling them to this main company and engaging with this new configuration, this new institution, was affecting their livelihoods, was affecting their politics, their understanding of their relationship to the environment, to their own culture. So it was multiple dimensions that I was looking at. But during this whole time, I was committed to doing long-term work with a particular set of individuals that I returned multiple times to Ecuador and repeatedly worked with. And so in the center of this frame, you can see the extended family, or in Quechua known as the Ayu, that was my home Ayu for most of the time. Some of them are also on the top right of your screen. If you can see, they're sitting around the fire drinking Wayusa the way that it's traditionally consumed in the early morning hours. And then on the top left, there is the grandfather of that family, who is sort of the patriarch and a very important influence on me and taught me so much of what I am able to share today. And then the man on the bottom left was my main research collaborator, and we worked together for many years and remain close friends. So I just want to root this work that I'm describing in a set of sort of kin relations, even if they're, maybe anthropologists would call them fictive kin, but these are important connections to highlight. And so in practical terms, I did a variety of different things during my graduate research. I spent a lot of time in gardens, or chacras as Quechua people call them. Spent a lot of time in meetings of indigenous communities, indigenous organizations, and some meetings between indigenous peoples and the main Wayusa company organization, which is the photo that you can see on the bottom right. We also did a variety of different projects, like this photo you can see on the bottom. This was actually a project that I did between undergrad and grad school. I didn't mention it, but I spent a year in Ecuador between undergrad and grad school on a Fulbright funded project that was looking at traditional culture around Wayusa. And so we did these art contests with local students using natural dyes. So I've been involved in a wide variety of different methods and activities for my research, which is very useful for what I'm doing now, which I'll get to briefly. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that towards the end of my time in graduate school, I started, so in practical terms, my funding ran out. I had a Fulbright Hays grant that funded my main year of dissertation fieldwork. And then I had another year of a National Science Foundation grant. And when that ended, I started sort of cobbling together a living, doing consulting work, and I did some teaching in Brazil. And I really want to highlight these experiences because I feel that I was successful in securing the job that I have now, in large measure due to these actually somewhat short job experiences towards the end of my graduate program. So I worked on this one project that was focused on indigenous Quechua foodways and diets, and we developed this book of recipes using local ingredients. So I was working with a dietitian and with ethnobotanists. So these were also experiences where interdisciplinarity was at the core of what I was working on. And then I worked on a project in the Sierra, in the Andean highlands, which was focused on understanding the factors influencing soil use and conservation. So it was a bit of a different context for me. Andean agriculture functions very differently, but working still with Quechua communities, but in the highland context, and trying to understand how their livelihoods were intersecting with these processes of environmental change. And for this one, I was working with agricultural engineers and agronomists, and I learned a lot from those collaborations in ways that has been very useful for what I'm doing now. And a spin-off of that project was doing urban ethnography in Quito and Riobamba as part of this campaign to promote the consumption of agroecological produce and foods, and also traditional grains. And so that gave me the opportunity to try to convey what I had learned about ethnographic methods, anthropological methods, to a group of rural development graduate students at a university in Quito. And so learning how to translate this sort of, in some ways, sacrosanct methodology of ethnography and anthropology into the many different contexts where anthropology is becoming a popular and widely used methodology was also very useful. And so now finally I'll get to my current role. So since June of last year, right after I finished my PhD at UTSA, I began my current job as environmental social scientist in the Andes Amazon program within a center at the Field Museum in Chicago, which is called the Keller Science Action Center. And the whole focus of our center is sort of what it sounds like, science action. So leveraging the resources of the museum, the collections, the scientific expertise at the museum towards action to promote conservation and quality of life um, around the world, but with two focal geographies, one being the Andean Amazon region, which essentially is the northern part of the Amazon, and the other being the Chicago region. So we also, my colleagues at the Action Center also do lots of different programs and activities with stakeholders in the Chicago area. And so I just wanted to sort of outline two of the main projects that I've been working on in my current role at the museum. The first is these rapid inventories. So the Andes Amazon program at the Field Museum started to some extent through these rapid biological inventories that the museum was doing in different areas of Amazonia. And you can see on the map on the left where most of them are concentrated in the Peruvian Amazon, but also around the rest of that region. And there's a couple that were in, a few that were in Cuba and one in China. And the idea behind this initially was to document biodiversity and conservation status of these landscapes to be able to support a case for the creation of protected areas. And the rapid inventories have gradually evolved to add on social dimensions, and which initially meant working with communities adjacent to proposed protected areas and trying to understand their assets, what they were already doing to promote the conservation of the area, as well as understanding their aspirations and trying to find ways for those aspirations to fit into the management plans and the vision for the new protected areas. And over time, those rapid inventories have evolved to have a more robust social component and to really try to understand conservation mosaics. So how indigenous territories fit in with existing protected areas and other kinds of conservation areas as a complex combination of land uses that can all contribute to conservation and sustainable land use. So I was involved in the 31st of these rapid inventories last year in a region called the Putumayo. And you can see on the map on the right, that's outlined in white is the Putumayo River watershed. And the Putumayo River runs from Ecuador all the way down to Brazil, and makes up a large portion of the Peru-Colombia border. And so for this rapid inventory number 31, our goal was to contribute to an effort that's emerged in the last few years to try to build a biocultural corridor or a biological and cultural corridor that connects these different kinds of conservation areas and sustainable land uses that I mentioned. And so as part of this Putumayo corridor effort, there have been two large binational gatherings of Peruvians and Colombians that either live in the Putumayo or work in the Putumayo. And the idea of this most recent inventory was to support that effort of bringing together people from both sides of the border to try to share experiences and to find ways to integrate management in this border region. I think that's actually, oh, yeah, I have some photos from the process of the inventory so you can get a sense for what that looks like. This was the social team as the photo on the top, and some of the mapping exercises and other activities that we did on the bottom. I believe, yes, that's the last slide I have. How much time do I have left, Tracy? I'm not exactly sure. I can't hear you.
Let me unmute myself. You have about 35 minutes to actually your presentation. If you're ready for questions, we can always go to that.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to share one last thing, and then we can do questions. That sounds great. So just wanted to list a few of the skills that I think I developed in graduate school that have been very useful in this new role at the museum. So I think language and translation skills have been very useful. The kind of synthetic thinking and analysis that you learn to do in graduate school, and research, obviously, the interdisciplinary work that I've described, and working on teams, as well as grant writing. All of these are skills that I developed sometimes directly through my research and sometimes through these other kinds of opportunities that I had, like these consultancies that I mentioned. But I also wanted to share that some of the skills that I wish I had have developed more and that I've noticed that I've had to work on more in my new role are organizing meetings and setting agendas. This is something that I never really learned to do as an anthropology student. Facilitating large group discussions. Most of what I did in graduate school was individual interviews or working with small groups. Writing for policy-oriented audiences and diverse audiences has been another challenge, but something that I've enjoyed learning. And finally, I think, and this is something I think we can all always benefit from working on, which is learning to listen and be diplomatic and and try to find a way to relate to different publics in a way that you're really taking their perspectives into account. So that's all I had for now. I'm sorry if I went a little long. I'm not sure, but I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
So let's see if we can get you to unshare your screen so we can see.
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah, there we go. And so I'm going to give everybody the warning. I am now going to stop the videotaping. I'm not going to end the meeting. And so with the stop of the recording, we are going to be open for candid questions.